The town of Brookfield, Ohio, was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to rush. Streets were lined with old maple trees, front porches still had rocking chairs, and neighbors waved even if they didn't know each other's names. On this Saturday afternoon, the town park was alive in a rare way. Police cruisers were parked neatly along the curb, their lights off but polished to a shine. Orange cones marked off demonstration areas, and a banner near the entrance read, "Community Safety Day, meet your local heroes." Families arrived early, spreading picnic blankets across the grass. Children ran barefoot, clutching balloons and sticky fingers from cotton candy. Laughter drifted through the air, mixed with the sound of radios crackling softly on police belts. It was meant to be an easy day, for learning, smiling, and reminding the community that the badge wasn't something to fear. At the center of it all stood Officer Daniel Moore and his K-9 partner, Rex. Rex was a large German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and eyes that seemed permanently alert. He sat beside Moore with military precision, back straight, head high, leash loose but controlled. This was not Rex's first public event. He had done demonstrations before: obedience, scent tracking, controlled takedowns using padded equipment. Children usually clapped. Adults usually nodded in appreciation. Rex followed commands flawlessly, every single time. But today felt different. Officer Moore felt it before he could explain it. He adjusted his grip on the leash, scanning the crowd. Everything looked normal, yet a strange tension hung in the air, subtle but present, like the quiet before a sudden storm. Across the park, near the edge of the crowd, stood a young couple with their 3-year-old son. Eli. Eli was small for his age, with soft brown hair that curled slightly at the ends and large eyes that always seemed to be studying the world rather than playing in it. While other children darted toward the police cars or tugged at their parents to see the flashing lights, Eli stayed close to his mother's side. His tiny hand wrapped tightly around her fingers, not in fear, but in habit. He wasn't looking at the balloons. He wasn't watching the officers. He wasn't even distracted by the barking of another K-9 further down the field. Eli was staring at Rex. From the moment they arrived, his gaze hadn't moved. His mother, Sarah, noticed it too. She bent slightly, brushing his hair back. "Do you want to go see the fire truck, honey?" she asked gently. Eli didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the police dog, his expression serious, almost thoughtful. His small chest rose and fell slowly, as if he were trying to remember something important but just couldn't quite reach it. Officer Moore gave the usual introduction over the loudspeaker, explaining Rex's role on the force, how he was trained to detect danger, protect officers, and help find people who were lost. The crowd listened politely. Some parents lifted their children onto their shoulders for a better view. Rex remained perfectly still. Then, without warning, his ears twitched. Officer Moore felt the change immediately. Rex's posture shifted, not aggressively, not playfully, but with focus. The dog's head turned slightly, eyes narrowing on a point in the crowd. On Eli. Moore followed the line of Rex's gaze. His first instinct was concern. Police dogs were trained to scan crowds, but sustained focus usually meant something had caught the dog's attention. A smell, a movement, a perceived threat. But there was nothing threatening about the child. Eli stood quietly, almost unnaturally calm for a 3-year-old in a park full of excitement. His mouth was slightly open, his brows gently furrowed. His mother felt his grip loosen on her hand. Before she could react, Eli took a small step forward. "Eli," she whispered, tightening her hold again. But the boy gently pulled free. Officer Moore stiffened. He subtly shortened the leash, not wanting to alarm the crowd. Parents nearby noticed the movement and shifted their children back instinctively. Everyone knew police dogs were highly trained, but also powerful. This wasn't a petting zoo. Eli took another step. Then another. Each step was slow, deliberate, as if he were walking toward something familiar rather than dangerous. His sneakers barely made a sound on the grass. The noise of the park seemed to fade around him, laughter softening, chatter quieting, as more people realized what was happening. A child was approaching the K-9 unit. "Ma'am, please," an officer nearby started to say. But then Rex did something that stopped him mid-sentence. Instead of rising, barking, or pulling forward, Rex sat even straighter. His tail did not wag. His body did not tense. He simply watched the child with an intensity that felt personal. Officer Moore's heart began to pound. This wasn't in the manual. Rex had faced armed suspects, chased fleeing criminals, and navigated chaotic scenes without hesitation. Yet here he was, completely focused on a toddler walking toward him with calm, unafraid steps. Eli stopped several feet away. The distance was close enough to make adults nervous, but far enough that no rule had technically been broken yet. The boy stood there, small shoulders squared, breathing evenly. His eyes met Rex. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Eli lifted his right hand. The crowd held its breath. Officer Moore's fingers tightened on the leash, muscles coiled and ready. If Rex moved even an inch out of line, Moore would act. He trusted his partner, but this situation was unlike anything they had trained for. Eli placed his hand over his heart. It was not a wave, not a point, not a reach. It was a gesture of recognition. Rex's ears lowered slightly, his eyes softened. Officer Moore felt his breath catch in his throat. Something was happening, something real, something deep, and it was unfolding in front of dozens of people who had no idea they were about to witness a moment that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. And this was only the beginning. The silence in the park felt unnatural. What had once been filled with children's laughter and casual conversation was now frozen in a collective pause, as if everyone sensed they were standing on the edge of something fragile. Eli's small hand rested firmly over his chest, his fingers curled slightly inward. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply stood there, eyes fixed on Rex, waiting. Officer Daniel Moore had spent over a decade on the force. He had trusted his instincts through traffic stops that went bad, domestic calls that turned violent, and night shifts that tested every nerve he had. Yet nothing in his experience prepared him for the sight in front of him. Rex was still. Not the trained stillness of obedience, but a different kind, deeper, heavier. His breathing slowed. His shoulders relaxed. The leash between them hung loose, untouched by tension. Moore quietly whispered, "Rex, heel." It was a soft command, almost a reflex. Rex did not move. That alone was enough to make Moore's pulse spike. Rex had never ignored a command. Across the park, Eli's mother, Sarah, felt her chest tighten painfully. Every protective instinct in her screamed to run forward and pull her son back. Her knees trembled, but her feet wouldn't move. Something about Eli's posture, his calm, his certainty, held her frozen in place. "Why isn't he scared?" she whispered to her husband. He had no answer. The boy lowered his hand slowly, then took one small step closer. Several officers moved at once, their bodies angling forward, hands hovering near radios and leashes. They weren't panicking, but they were ready. Police dogs were trained to read threats, not innocence. A wrong movement, a sudden noise, and instinct could take over. But Rex didn't react the way anyone expected. Instead of standing his ground or pulling back, he tilted his head slightly to the side. It was a small movement, subtle enough that only those closest noticed it, but for a working K-9 it was enormous. It was curiosity, recognition. Officer Moore felt his throat tighten. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, unsure if he was talking to the dog or himself. Eli stopped again, now close enough that the size difference between them became impossible to ignore. The boy barely reached Rex's chest. One was trained for danger, built with muscle and discipline. The other was small, fragile, and impossibly brave. Rex's eyes never left Eli's face. Then slowly, almost carefully, Rex sat down. Not the sharp, instant sit of a command, but a measured, intentional one. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is that supposed to happen?" Officer Moore swallowed hard. No, it was. Rex sitting on his own wasn't a sign of submission or disobedience. It was a choice. One Rex had never made in public before. Eli's lips curved upward into a small smile. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. He lifted his hand again, this time extending it slightly forward, not reaching for Rex, but offering it in the air between them, palm relaxed. A child's version of permission. Rex leaned forward just enough to sniff. His nose hovered inches from Eli's fingers. The dog inhaled slowly, deeply, as if reading a story written in scent and memory rather than words. Officer Moore felt his vision blur. He remembered Rex on long nights, searching woods and fields, tracking the faintest signs of fear. He remembered how Rex behaved when he found someone alive, how his intensity shifted into something gentler, focused on staying close. This was the same behavior. A murmur spread through the crowd. That dog knows him. No way. This is unreal. Eli's parents stood frozen, fear and awe twisting together in their chests. They wanted to stop the moment, to protect their child, but they also felt something else. A strange certainty that stepping in now would break something important. Rex lowered his head further. His ears flattened slightly, not in fear but in calm acceptance. He let out a quiet breath through his nose, a sound only the closest officers could hear. Then Rex did something no one would forget. He placed one paw forward. Not touching Eli. Not reaching. Just resting it on the grass between them. A signal. Officer Moore's hand trembled as he loosened his grip on the leash by a single inch. His training told him to stop this. His heart told him not to. Eli knelt down. Parents cried out softly, but before panic could rise, Rex mirrored the movement by lowering himself into a lying position, his body angled protectively, not threatening. The boy's tiny knees pressed into the grass. He leaned forward slightly and whispered something no microphone could catch. Rex's tail gave one slow, gentle wag. Officer Moore felt something crack open inside his chest. He dropped to one knee without thinking, eyes never leaving his partner. Rex turned his head briefly, meeting Moore's gaze. In that look was no confusion, no stress. Only calm. Only knowing. Moore spoke quietly into his radio, his voice barely steady. Stand down, everything's okay. No one argued. The park was silent now, not with fear but with reverence. People instinctively knew they were witnessing something sacred, not entertainment, not a performance. A reunion, perhaps, but one that didn't yet make sense. Eli reached out at last, his fingers brushing the air just above Rex's fur. He didn't touch him yet. He hesitated as if waiting for approval. Rex lifted his head slightly and nudged forward, just enough. Permission granted. The boy's fingers sank into the thick fur at Rex's neck. Rex closed his eyes. Sarah collapsed onto a nearby bench, tears streaming freely now. Her husband wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes burning. Officer Moore exhaled a shaky breath. Whatever was happening between this child and his dog went beyond training, beyond rules, beyond explanation. And deep down, he knew this moment was only opening a door. The reason for it, the truth behind this impossible calm, was about to change everything they thought they understood about loyalty, memory, and the silent promises dogs keep. And the answers were coming. For a moment the park seemed suspended in time. Children's laughter had vanished, the birds had quieted, even the gentle breeze felt as if it were holding its breath. Eli knelt on the grass, his small fingers brushing lightly against Rex's thick fur. The dog leaned closer, his warm breath brushing the boy's hand, eyes half closed in serene recognition. It was a simple gesture, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention, but to those who did, it carried an unmistakable depth. Officer Daniel Moore remained on one knee, heart pounding, gripping the leash loosely. Every fiber of his training screamed caution, yet he could sense that this was not a situation requiring control or command. Rex's behavior was deliberate, instinctive, and utterly gentle. The dog had never once acted this way in a demonstration in the field or in any scenario Moore had encountered. This was beyond discipline. It was connection. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to murmur in hushed tones. Some parents instinctively moved closer to their children, unsure whether the scene unfolding was extraordinary or dangerous. But fear quickly dissolved into fascination as they noticed the way Rex's body relaxed completely, his muscles uncoiling as if a weight had been lifted. His massive head rested slightly forward, close to Eli, yet the dog didn't move too quickly. There was patience in every movement, a deliberate understanding that only someone, or something, had earned. Eli, unaware of the gasps and whispered comments behind him, continued to trace small circles over Rex's shoulder with his tiny hand. There was a stillness in him that was almost unnatural for a child his age. No other child in the park would have dared remain so calm near a working police dog, but Eli's actions were deliberate, born of memory and trust. "Look at him, he's calm," whispered a woman in the crowd. The dog knows him." Officer Moore couldn't help but nod slightly. He had witnessed Rex save lives in ways most civilians couldn't even imagine. Yet this display of instinct and restraint was entirely unprecedented. Moore had trained for months to read the subtleties in Rex's behavior during tense operations, but the dog's gaze now, soft and unyielding, locked on Eli's face, was something no manual could ever teach. The boy lifted his eyes and looked straight into Rex's. It was a look filled with recognition, comfort, and an unspoken understanding. Moore felt a lump form in his throat. Something about that gaze made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. There was history here, a memory neither words nor time had erased. Then suddenly, Eli did something no one expected. He laughed softly. It wasn't a loud, boisterous laugh. It was quiet, almost reverent, a sound that seemed to release a tension no one else knew had been building. The sound was enough to make Rex twitch his ears, a small, subtle acknowledgement of joy. He pressed his nose closer, gently nudging the boy with warmth and familiarity. The crowd leaned forward as one. Cameras were raised, phones extended, yet even in this age of constant recording, no one dared interrupt. Everyone knew that this moment wasn't about them. It belonged solely to the boy and the dog. Eli's parents, who had been frozen with both fear and awe, now stepped forward cautiously. His mother's voice trembled as she whispered, "Eli, are you okay?" Eli turned his head just slightly, keeping his hand on Rex's fur. He's safe," he said softly, almost to himself. "He's my friend." The words were so simple, yet they carried a weight that seemed to ripple through the entire park. The officers exchanged stunned glances. One of them muttered, "That kid, he's talking to a police dog like it's human." But in reality, Eli was speaking the truth. To him, Rex was no longer a demonstration animal, no longer a tool of law enforcement. Rex was a protector, a silent guardian who had saved him once and now recognized him in a way only animals can recognize people. Moore's mind raced as he recalled the missing child reports from months earlier. Eli had wandered away from home during a sudden storm, and it had taken hours before a K-9 unit found him shivering near a creek. Rex, the very same dog, had been on that search. Moore remembered the reports, how the dog had refused to leave the boy's side until medics arrived. Eli had survived that night because of a bond built on instinct and trust, long before he could even understand what had happened. Now, seeing Eli kneel before him, Moore realized the depth of what was unfolding. Rex wasn't responding to training. He was responding to memory, to recognition, to a shared history that no human could fully articulate. The crowd's fascination deepened when Rex carefully rested one paw on the grass, inches from Eli. It wasn't a gesture of dominance or play. It was a silent offering, a question. Is it okay? Can I be near you? Eli's smile widened, a mixture of relief and joy. He slowly extended his small hand, hovering just above the massive dog's paw. Rex remained still, unwavering, allowing the child to make the next move. In that instant, Officer Moore and the other officers realized that the scene before them was unlike any public demonstration they had ever conducted. This was no performance. This was a reunion. "Stay calm," Moore whispered under his breath. "Don't move too fast." Eli, sensing the caution, made no sudden movements. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his fingertips grazing Rex's fur. The dog closed his eyes momentarily, tilting his massive head to press lightly against the boy's shoulder. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Even those who had seen countless police demonstrations recognized the rarity of such an unprompted display of trust. For several long seconds, time seemed to suspend itself. Children who had been running and shouting moments ago were now sitting quietly on the grass, sensing the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Parents exchanged astonished glances. Phones hung forgotten in hands. Even the wind seemed to pause, rustling through the maple trees like it was holding its breath. Then, as if understanding the eyes watching him, Eli whispered again, "It's okay now, Rex. You don't need to worry." At that, Rex did something extraordinary. He lowered his massive body onto the grass, legs folded neatly beneath him, his head resting near Eli's knees. Not a single muscle twitched with tension. His tail remained still. The sheer weight of the gesture conveyed protection, calm, and profound understanding. Moore knelt beside them, nearly trembling. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," he admitted, voice low, almost to himself. From the edges of the crowd, murmurs spread. "He recognizes him. Is that possible? The dog saved him before. I remember the story." Eli looked up briefly, smiling gently. "I remembered him," he said simply. "He helped me before. I remember now." The crowd remained silent, hanging on the small boy's words. Even the officers felt a strange shiver, a recognition that this moment was bigger than training, bigger than procedure. It was instinct, memory, and connection made visible. The world outside that park could never have predicted this. To strangers, it might have looked like a child kneeling before a dog. But to those present, it was a story of survival, trust, and loyalty unfolding before their eyes. Rex lifted his head slowly, still watching Eli with attentive eyes. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried reassurance. "You are safe. I remember you. You are mine." Eli laughed softly again, brushing a small hand across Rex's head. That laugh, quiet yet full of wonder, seemed to seal the bond. No commands were necessary. No instructions. Just mutual recognition, respect, and memory. At that moment, Officer Moore realized something profound. Every K-9 unit, every demonstration, every piece of training had led him here, but nothing could have prepared him for this. This was instinct, pure and unfiltered, bridging the gap between human and animal in a way words could never capture. And for Eli, it was more than a demonstration. It was a reunion with a hero he had forgotten but never truly lost. As the crowd watched in awe, Moore knew one thing. The story had only just begun. There were answers to uncover, histories to connect, and lessons in loyalty and courage that this little boy and the police dog were about to teach everyone present. The park remained silent. Even the smallest rustle of leaves seemed too loud in the presence of what was happening. Eli's tiny fingers continued to rest against Rex's fur, tracing the outline of the dog's shoulder with delicate, unhurried movements. Rex, massive and disciplined, remained still, his eyes half closed, breathing slow and controlled. His body had shifted from alert K9 to protective guardian in a manner that no training manual could have prepared Officer Moore, or anyone else, for. Moore sank to one knee beside his partner, gripping the leash loosely. He wanted to remain vigilant, but he realized that in this moment, vigilance was irrelevant. Rex wasn't reacting to a threat. He was reacting to a memory, a connection forged long before the police demonstration had even begun. From across the park, the crowd's reactions varied. Some people whispered in disbelief, others gasped audibly. Children who had been running freely moments ago stood frozen, mesmerized by the quiet display. Phones and cameras were raised hesitantly, yet most spectators remained silent, sensing that this moment wasn't for recording, it was for witnessing. Rex's handler tried to maintain composure. "Buddy, heel," Moore whispered quietly, his voice low, almost reverent. The dog didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shift in weight. He simply rested his head closer to Eli's legs, eyes never leaving the boy's face. Sarah, Eli's mother, let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her husband placed a hand over hers, gripping it tightly. They both knew that something extraordinary was happening, but neither could explain it. "Is he okay?" Sarah's voice shook as she asked, her eyes glued to Eli. Eli looked up, his brown eyes wide yet calm. "He's safe," he whispered softly. His words were simple, but they carried an authority beyond his age. There was certainty in them that reassured everyone around. Rex's body responded subtly. The dog leaned slightly forward, lowering his massive head until his nose brushed against Eli's fingers. It was a gesture of reassurance, a silent acknowledgement that trust had been recognized and returned. Officer Moore's chest tightened. He had seen Rex interact with people before, but never with such quiet understanding, never with such intention. Several officers moved closer cautiously, unsure of what to do. One of them whispered, "I've never seen him behave like this." Moore nodded slowly. "Neither have I," he watched as Rex lifted a paw and rested it near Eli, not touching, simply offering his presence. It was a subtle signal, yet anyone who knew K9 behavior recognized its significance. The dog was in complete control, calm, and deliberately choosing to accept this child. At that moment, a memory flashed in Moore's mind. Months earlier, Eli had wandered from his home during a violent storm. Frightened and soaked, he had hidden near a creek, trembling and alone. Rex had been dispatched to search for him. According to the reports, Rex had found Eli quickly, refusing to leave the boy's side until medics arrived. That night, a toddler's life had been saved because a dog instinctively understood what humans could not. And now Moore realized, Rex remembered. Eli's smile widened slightly, almost imperceptibly. He leaned forward just enough to whisper something no one else could hear. "It's okay, I know you." Rex exhaled softly, a quiet sound that carried far more meaning than any bark or growl ever could. His massive frame relaxed completely. The tension that had hung in the air dissipated, leaving a stillness that felt sacred. Parents around the park whispered to each other in awe, "He recognizes him. The dog, it's the same one that found him. I can't believe this." Eli's mother finally stepped closer, her hand hovering above his shoulder. "Honey, do you want to stand?" she asked softly, though she knew the answer. Eli shook his head slightly, unwilling to break the connection. He looked at Rex with unwavering focus, and the dog responded by lowering his body fully onto the grass, chest to the ground, head resting near Eli's knees. The protective gesture was unmistakable. It was the way a K9 conveys safety and loyalty when words are unnecessary. Officer Moore knelt beside them, eyes wide. He had trained for countless scenarios where a K9 might have to act on instinct, chase, or even subdue. But nothing in his career had prepared him to witness the bond between a child and a police dog remembered across months, across fear and trauma, across the chaos of life. The crowd held its breath as Eli finally reached forward and placed his small hand on Rex's shoulder. Not to command, not to touch excessively, just a gentle acknowledgement of presence. Rex leaned slightly into the touch, eyes soft, tail still. It was as if the dog was confirming, "Yes, I remember you. Yes, you are safe." Nearby officers whispered among themselves, "I've handled dogs for years, but this is unreal." He's responding to memory, not command. Sarah wept quietly, pressing a hand over her mouth. Her husband wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I can't believe it," she whispered. He really remembers him." The K-9 unit trainer stepped forward slowly, observing. "This behavior, it's rare. It's beyond training. Only a dog with a past connection, a true memory of rescue, would behave like this." And it was true. No manual could prepare anyone for this. Rex wasn't performing. He wasn't obeying commands or responding to cues. He was acknowledging a bond that had been formed long before today, a bond built on instinct, trust, and survival. Eli whispered again, almost inaudibly, "You helped me before, now I can help you too." Rex lifted his massive head slightly, gazing directly into Eli's eyes. There was understanding there, recognition, gratitude, and perhaps in a way only animals and children share, love. The crowd remained mesmerized. Phones and cameras recorded, but no one wanted to speak. No one dared interfere. They were witnesses to a reunion of a sort rarely seen, a tiny child, a massive dog, connected in ways that transcended logic, training, or expectation. Officer Moore finally exhaled slowly. "He's calm. He's not going to move aggressively," he whispered to another officer. "I think he knows him." It was clear to everyone. This wasn't a demonstration. This wasn't a show. This was a meeting that had been written by fate, chance, and the memory of a rescue long past, and it was unfolding in front of dozens of astonished witnesses. Eli's fingers lingered on Rex's fur, tracing circles that seemed to soothe both the child and the dog. And in that moment, it didn't matter how many people watched or whispered. It didn't matter that months or years had passed since their first meeting. What mattered was here in the grass, under the maple trees, with a boy and a dog who remembered each other perfectly. The world outside that park could never have predicted this. To strangers, it might have looked like a child kneeling before a dog. But to those present, it was a story of survival, trust, and loyalty unfolding before their eyes. Rex nudged his head slightly against Eli's hand, a gesture so small it might have been missed. But to those paying attention, it was everything. Protection, comfort, recognition, the silent promise of a dog who had once saved a life and now remembered the child whose life he had touched. Eli smiled faintly, brushing his hair back from his face. "It's okay, I know you," he repeated softly, voice barely above a whisper. And with that, a bond that had been forged in fear, reinforced by instinct, and remembered across months, shone brighter than anyone could have imagined. Officer Moore knelt beside them, watching, heart pounding. He knew the story was far from over. The answers about the boy, the dog, and the reason for this extraordinary recognition were just beginning to unfold. The crowd sensed it too. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They watched, captivated, as one small boy and one incredible dog reconnected in a way no one could have anticipated, a moment that would stay with them forever. The park was still, but the energy in the air had shifted. It was no longer anticipation or suspense. It had become reverence. The spectators weren't just watching a demonstration anymore. They were witnessing the reunion of two beings bound by experience, survival, and instinct. Yet most of the crowd still had no idea why the connection between Eli and Rex seemed so profound. Only Eli's parents knew the full story, and for months they had held it tightly, unwilling to repeat it until now. Sarah, Eli's mother, wiped her tears and finally spoke softly, her voice trembling but steady. "I think it's time people know," she said to her husband. Her eyes were fixed on their son, who remained kneeling beside Rex. The words she was about to share would explain everything, but for the unprepared crowd, it was almost unimaginable. It had all happened months ago, on a rainy, stormy night that the family would never forget. Eli, then just 2.5 years old, had wandered away from home while his parents were briefly distracted. A loud clap of thunder, a flashing streetlight, and a curiosity-driven step had taken him out of their sight. The streets had been slick, dark, and unfamiliar, and Eli, though brave for his age, quickly became frightened. Sarah's voice cracked as she continued. He was gone for hours. Every second felt like a lifetime. The rain soaked him and he kept crying, calling for us, but he couldn't find his way back. Her husband swallowed hard, gripping her hand tightly. The memory of that night still haunted them. The K-9 unit had been called immediately. Officer Moore, though a different handler at that time, had overseen the operation that night. The team had combed through the neighborhood, scanning yards, streets, and alleys. They had called out Eli's name over loudspeakers, but there was no response, only the sound of rain hitting leaves and pavement. Then Rex had arrived on the scene. Rex, though young, was already a highly trained police dog with a reputation for persistence and calm in high-pressure situations. When he arrived, he immediately picked up Eli's scent. Following instinct, he navigated the dark, slick streets with precision, ignoring obstacles and hazards that would have stopped most adults. When Rex found Eli, crouched near a creek and trembling with cold and fear, the dog didn't bark or growl. He didn't demand obedience. He simply lay down beside the child, nudging him gently with his nose, resting a paw nearby, offering warmth and protection. For hours, Rex stayed with Eli. He refused to move until medics arrived, ensuring the boy remained calm and safe. That night, when Eli's parents finally found him, their relief was overwhelming. But more importantly, Eli had survived unharmed thanks to Rex's unwavering vigilance. No one else in the town had known the full story, not even the neighbors. It was something private, something that existed only between a frightened child and a dog who had been trained to save lives. Yet that experience had left a lasting impression on Eli, even though he was too young at the time to fully understand what had happened. Sarah paused, letting the memory sink into the crowd's consciousness. He doesn't remember everything from that night, but he remembers Rex, in his own way. Moore felt his throat tighten as he watched Eli, still kneeling beside Rex. The boy's calm demeanor, the gentle hand on the dog's fur, the quiet recognition in his eyes, it all made sense now. This wasn't fearlessness born of ignorance. This was a child who had experienced protection firsthand, who instinctively trusted the dog who had saved him. And Rex, despite being trained for many scenarios, wasn't responding to commands or cues. He was responding to memory. He remembered the child, the scent, the instinctual bond that had formed that night. He remembered the fear, the relief, and the trust. And now, months later, that bond was quietly being reaffirmed in front of a stunned crowd. Sarah took a deep breath, eyes glistening. That night, if it weren't for Rex, Eli wouldn't be here with us today. Her voice cracked. She looked down at her son, who was still kneeling, eyes wide and fixed on the dog. And now he knows it. The officers and onlookers absorbed the story in silence. Some leaned forward, heads tilted, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. Others whispered to each other, amazed that a trained police dog could recognize someone after months had passed. One officer muttered under his breath, "I've handled K-9s for years, but I've never seen this level of recognition." Moore nodded, unable to take his eyes off the pair. "It's beyond training," he said quietly. This is instinct, memory, and trust all at once. It's something you can't teach." Eli's father knelt down next to his wife, his voice quiet but full of awe. "He remembers you, son. Rex remembers you." Eli's small voice barely carried across the few feet separating him from the crowd. "I remember him too," he whispered. "I was scared, but he kept me safe." Rex's massive head lifted slightly at the sound of Eli's words. He pressed closer as if to affirm silently, "Yes, I was there. I still remember. I am here now." The spectators, many of whom had come expecting a routine demonstration of K9 skills, now realized they were witnessing something far more extraordinary. It wasn't just a police demonstration. It was the tangible embodiment of loyalty, protection, and memory, a bond between human and animal that had been tested in real life and now rekindled in the light of day. Eli's parents exchanged glances, a mix of relief and pride shining through their eyes. They had kept this story private for months, not wanting attention or accolades. But seeing their son kneeling there, confident and calm, while Rex stayed perfectly composed beside him, they knew this was a moment worth sharing. Moore, still kneeling beside the dog, whispered softly, "You too, you remind everyone why we do this, why we train, why we serve." The crowd remained hushed, captivated by the scene. Some children crept closer, curious but respectful. Others stayed with their parents, sensing the significance of what was unfolding. No one spoke above a whisper. No one moved too quickly. This was sacred, even if only for a few fleeting minutes. Eli reached up slowly, resting his tiny hand fully on Rex's shoulder. The dog leaned into the touch, exhaling slowly, a low, contented sound escaping his muzzle. It was a sound of reassurance, recognition, and deep, unspoken understanding. At that moment, the story became more than a tale of a missing child or a police demonstration. It became a story of survival, memory, and the profound, often invisible bonds between humans and animals. The crowd, officers and parents alike, felt the weight of it. Sarah smiled through tears, gently whispering to Eli, "He never forgot you, honey. And now you remember him too." Eli's small face lit up with a soft smile. "I'll never forget him again," he said quietly. Rex responded with a soft nuzzle, pressing his head gently into Eli's lap, as if promising that no matter what happened in the future, the bond they shared would endure. And in that quiet, miraculous moment, everyone understood something profound. It was not the size of the dog, the age of the child, or the training of the K9 that mattered. It was the memory of protection, the instinct to safeguard, and the unspoken trust that connected them, two beings, forever linked by a single night of fear and courage. The demonstration, now completely transformed, had stopped being about skills or commands. It had become a living lesson in trust, loyalty, and the power of recognition, a lesson that would stay with everyone who saw it for the rest of their lives. And as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Eli and Rex remained together, a boy and his guardian dog, reunited in a way that neither time nor distance could erase. The park remained hushed, the crowd captivated by the quiet reunion of Eli and Rex. Yet Officer Daniel Moore knew that the story was far from finished. While the town had just learned about Eli's harrowing night, few had any idea of Rex's full history, of the countless nights spent tracking, protecting, and saving lives. And now, standing here beside his partner, Moore understood why this connection had occurred with such intensity. It was no accident. Rex had been more than a demonstration dog. Before arriving at the Brookfield Police Department, he had served in a search and rescue unit, responding to emergencies across the state. He had been deployed to forests, rivers, and disaster zones, trained to detect human scent in the most extreme conditions. Time and again, he had found lost or injured individuals who might never have been discovered without his help. Officer Moore knelt beside Rex, running a hand gently along the dog's fur. He whispered, "You remember, don't you, boy?" Rex's ears twitched slightly, and he pressed his head against Eli's lap, eyes soft and attentive. Moore's words were not commands. They were acknowledgments of shared history, of instinct guiding action beyond human instruction. The crowd began to murmur again, sensing the unfolding layers of the story. A fellow officer stepped forward, quietly explaining to those watching, "Rex isn't just trained for demonstrations. He saved lives, multiple times, but what you're seeing now, this is different. This is recognition. Moore nodded silently, recalling one particular night that had defined Rex's reputation. A severe thunderstorm had hit a neighboring county, and a toddler had wandered away from his home. The child had been lost for hours, shivering in the rain, exhausted and scared. Rex, working with his handler at the time, had navigated the flooded streets and uneven terrain, relentlessly tracking the boy's scent. When Rex found him, the dog didn't bark or act aggressively. He simply lay down beside the child, providing warmth, comfort, and reassurance until human help arrived. That child survived. That night became part of Rex's legacy, a story known only to the families involved and the K-9 unit. And now, months later, in front of the Brookfield community, history had quietly repeated itself. The child in front of Rex, Eli, was the same one he had found that stormy night. Time had passed, but memory had not. Rex remembered the fear, the relief, the instinctive bond formed in the dark, rain-soaked hours, and he was responding now instinctively, without command, without hesitation. The realization hit Officer Moore hard. K-9s were trained to act on command, to protect, to detect, and to serve. But few humans understood the depth of their memory. Few appreciated that these dogs carried histories, recollections of life-and-death events that guided their behavior in ways no manual could explain. Rex's actions were guided by the memory of saving a life and the trust built in a fleeting moment of terror. The crowd remained mesmerized as Eli finally stood, slowly, carefully, his hand still resting on Rex's shoulder. He looked up at the massive dog and whispered something only they could hear. "You saved me before, now we're together again." Rex responded by nudging the boy gently with his head, a subtle motion that seemed loaded with meaning. It wasn't just affection, it was recognition, acknowledgement, and reassurance. To the crowd, it looked like a gentle interaction. To those who knew K-9 behavior, it was extraordinary. Sarah, Eli's mother, wiped her tears and whispered to her husband, "Do you see it? He knows him, he really knows him." Her husband nodded, swallowing hard. It's not just memory, it's connection, a bond forged in life and fear. Nothing we've ever trained or taught could create this. Officer Moore stepped forward and addressed the crowd quietly. Rex isn't just a dog on display today. He saved lives, worked tirelessly to protect the community, and now he's showing all of us something rare. A child he once saved is standing before him, and he remembers. The spectators remained silent, captivated by the weight of Moore's words. Phones were lowered, conversations paused. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the gravity of the moment settled in. Rex, for his part, shifted slightly, leaning his head fully into Eli's lap. The gesture was subtle but deliberate. His body relaxed completely, a rare display of trust and recognition. He had never behaved like this with strangers, with colleagues, or even during demonstrations. This was personal. This was history in motion. The handlers around Moore nodded in quiet acknowledgement. This is the kind of thing we never get to see," one murmured. "Even the best K-9s, trained for everything, rarely react like this to a single individual." Moore's eyes swept over the crowd. Children watched in awe, parents whispered softly to one another, and officers stood in stunned silence. Everyone present felt the weight of a bond formed in fear, reinforced by survival, and now honored in a quiet, public moment of recognition. Eli, sensing the solemnity, spoke softly, still kneeling beside Rex. "You remembered me," he said. "I didn't forget you either." The words hung in the air like a sacred vow. They were not just about the past, they were about continuity, trust, and memory. Rex responded with a low, contented exhale, closing his eyes briefly as if to confirm, "Yes, I remember. I am here now. You are safe." Officer Moore felt a lump form in his throat. He had trained K-9s for years, witnessed countless rescues, and encountered extraordinary dogs, but he had never seen one remember and respond with such deliberate precision and emotion. This was instinct, yes, but it was also history, loyalty, and love. All the elements of humanity and animal instinct had aligned in a single, quiet moment. Sarah stepped forward cautiously, placing her hands gently on Eli's shoulders. "He never forgot you, honey, and now you two are together again." Eli's small hands rested against Rex's fur, eyes wide and shining. "I'll never forget him again," he said. Rex responded with a soft nuzzle, pressing his head gently into Eli's lap. The dog's gesture was loaded with meaning, protection, reassurance, and acknowledgement of the bond that had survived months of separation. The crowd watched, mesmerized. They had come expecting a routine demonstration, a display of obedience and training. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary, a living, breathing testament to memory, loyalty, and the unspoken bonds between humans and animals. Officer Moore whispered to the crowd, "Sometimes, the smallest moments teach the biggest lessons. What you're seeing today is one of them." The spectators remained silent, captivated. No one moved. No one spoke above a whisper. Every eye was on Eli and Rex. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, the boy and the dog remained side by side, a living symbol of trust, instinct, and the unbreakable connection formed when life hangs in the balance. And deep inside Moore's heart, he knew that the story was far from over. The bond between Eli and Rex had just begun to reveal its true meaning. There were more lessons to uncover, more moments to witness, and more proof that the connection between a child and a dog, forged in fear and memory, could leave an indelible mark on everyone who was fortunate enough to see it. By now, the park had fallen into an almost sacred hush. Parents clutched their children, and the children themselves stood frozen, wide-eyed, unsure if they were witnessing something ordinary or extraordinary. What had started as a simple demonstration had transformed into a moment no one would forget. A reunion of trust and memory between a 3-year-old boy and a police dog who had saved his life months earlier. Officer Daniel Moore remained kneeling beside Rex, his hand resting lightly on the dog's thick fur. He felt a strange mixture of pride and awe. Pride in the dog he had trained, and awe at the invisible threads of memory and instinct connecting Rex to Eli. Moore had worked with K-9 units for over a decade, yet he had never seen anything like this. A display not prompted by commands, but by memory and pure emotional recognition. Rex's massive body remained calm and still, though his head moved slightly as Eli's small hand rested gently on his shoulder. The dog's tail twitched slowly, a subtle sign of contentment and reassurance. To an untrained eye, it might have seemed like a minor movement, but those familiar with K-9 behavior understood the significance. Rex was not just comfortable. He was protective, alert, and utterly devoted all at once. The crowd, sensing the gravity of the scene, leaned forward collectively, voices hushed. Even the reporters who had arrived for footage of the usual police demonstrations lowered their cameras, realizing that what they were capturing was far beyond any ordinary story. One elderly man whispered to his wife, "I've seen K-9 units in action before, but this is something else." His wife nodded, her eyes fixed on Eli and Rex. "It's like they understand each other without words," she murmured. Nearby, a group of teenagers exchanged wide-eyed glances. The dog's actually listening to him," one said, voice barely audible. Officer Moore cleared his throat softly and addressed the small crowd that had gathered closer. "What you're witnessing isn't a demonstration," he said gently. "This is a bond that goes beyond training. Rex remembers this child. He saved him once and now recognizes him. It's instinct, yes, but it's also memory, loyalty, and trust. What you see here is rare, and it's something special." The crowd grew even quieter. Even though they didn't fully understand the mechanics of memory in dogs, they could feel the significance. There was something sacred in the interaction, something that transcended words and commands. Sarah, Eli's mother, stepped forward, brushing tears from her cheeks. Her voice shook, but it carried clearly to the crowd. Months ago, Eli wandered from home during a storm, she said. He was scared, alone, and vulnerable. Rex found him, stayed with him, and protected him until help arrived. Tonight or today, whatever this moment is, Eli remembers Rex, and Rex remembers him. There was a pause as the words sank in. Children shifted uneasily, some hugging their parents closer. Adults exchanged glances filled with awe, realizing that this tiny boy and this massive dog had shared something life-changing. Eli, still kneeling beside Rex, looked up at the crowd briefly. His eyes shone with a quiet confidence, a kind of courage that only comes from having been saved. "I remember him," he said softly, almost to himself. "And he remembers me too." The dog responded with a gentle exhale, nudging Eli's hand with his nose. It was subtle, but the movement carried immense meaning. This was more than affection. It was acknowledgement, recognition, and trust reaffirmed. Moore's heart tightened as he watched. He had handled countless rescues, witnessed dogs saving lives, and been part of K9 demonstrations for years. But this moment was different. There was no training, no protocol, no expectation. There was only the pure, unspoken bond between a child and the dog who had once saved him. From the edge of the park, one of the senior officers whispered, "I've seen this once before, decades ago. A K9 that remembered someone like this, but it's incredibly rare." Moore nodded silently. "Yes," he whispered back, "and to witness it in public like this, it's unforgettable." The crowd began to relax slightly, their tension shifting from disbelief to appreciation. People whispered to one another about the rarity of what they were seeing. Some parents gently encouraged their children to approach and observe from a respectful distance. Others simply watched, unable to tear their eyes away. Eli's small hands remained on Rex, brushing gently over the dog's fur. "You kept me safe," he whispered, "and now I'll keep you safe too." The dog shifted slightly, lowering his massive head until it rested near Eli's knees. It was a gesture of protection, signaling both comfort and readiness. Any other child in the park might have been intimidated by the sheer size of the dog, but Eli's calm presence had a grounding effect. Rex responded instinctively, aware that the child posed no threat and that their bond required patience and gentleness. The crowd collectively exhaled. Phones were raised hesitantly again, capturing the interaction, but no one spoke. They understood that this wasn't a performance. It was a living testament to loyalty, trust, and instinct. Sarah knelt beside Eli, brushing his hair back and smiling through her tears. "He never forgot you," she whispered, "and now you remember him." Eli smiled faintly, his small hand still resting against Rex's shoulder. "I won't forget him ever again," he said softly. Rex responded with a subtle nuzzle, pressing his head gently into Eli's lap. The dog's body language was unmistakable, calm, accepting, and fully present. The bond between them radiated, touching everyone in the park in a way that no one expected. Officer Moore finally stood, addressing the crowd in a quiet, reverent voice. "Sometimes, what you see isn't about commands or demonstrations," he said. "It's about memory, loyalty, and the connections that save lives. Today, we've witnessed something extraordinary. A child, a dog, and a bond that will last a lifetime. Remember this." The spectators remained silent for several moments longer, taking in the gravity of the situation. Slowly, one by one, they began to applaud softly, reverently, not in mockery or routine, but in recognition of the miracle unfolding before them. Even the children in the crowd, inspired by the quiet strength of Eli and the gentle presence of Rex, clapped softly, their eyes wide with wonder. Parents hugged their children tightly, feeling both awe and relief that such bonds existed in the world. Rex, sensing the shift in energy, lifted his head slightly and glanced at Officer Moore. His eyes were calm, alert, and full of understanding. Moore nodded, understanding that the dog had done more than his training required. He had remembered, he had recognized, and he had reaffirmed a bond that had saved a life months ago. Eli stood slowly, still brushing his hand along Rex's shoulder. "Come on," he whispered softly to the dog. "Let's go together." Rex rose, towering over the small child, yet moving with a controlled grace that suggested protection rather than threat. The crowd stepped back respectfully, sensing that this was a private moment, even in public. As they walked together toward Eli's parents, the bond between child and dog was unmistakable. It was silent but eloquent. It needed no words. They had survived fear and separation, and now, reunited, they radiated a connection that everyone present felt in their hearts. Officer Moore watched, a lump forming in his throat. "This," he whispered, "is why we do what we do, to protect, to serve, and sometimes to witness the extraordinary." And as Eli reunited fully with his parents, Rex sitting obediently beside him, the crowd erupted, not with chaos, but with heartfelt applause, whispers of awe, and the kind of emotional energy that only comes from witnessing something unforgettable. It was a moment of silence, recognition, and gratitude that no one would ever forget. The afternoon sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting long, golden rays across the park. The crowd, still present but quieter now, watched as Eli, his parents, and Rex walked slowly along the grass. There was no rush, no sense of spectacle, just a boy and his dog, reunited and at peace, carrying with them a story that would linger in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. Eli's small hand rested lightly on Rex's shoulder, guiding the dog as they walked. Despite his size, Rex moved carefully, attuned to every movement, every breath of the child beside him. Officer Daniel Moore followed silently, his eyes tracing the pair with a mixture of awe and respect. Years of experience with K-9 units had taught him that these dogs were exceptional, but what he was seeing now went far beyond training, discipline, or instinct. This was memory, connection, and trust manifesting in real time. As they approached a shaded area beneath the maple trees, Sarah and her husband knelt to welcome Eli fully. The boy hesitated briefly, looking down at Rex. The dog responded by lowering his head, brushing his nose gently against Eli's knees, a quiet gesture of encouragement and reassurance. Eli's face lit up in a small, relieved smile, and he stepped fully into his parents' embrace while keeping one hand on Rex. The spectators watched silently, some dabbing tears from their eyes, others exchanging whispered conversations about what they had just witnessed. "I've never seen anything like this," an elderly woman said to her neighbor. It's magical." Her neighbor nodded, eyes still fixed on Eli and Rex. "It's more than magic, it's loyalty, bravery, and memory. That dog, he remembers the child, and the child remembers him. That's incredible." Officer Moore knelt beside Rex, speaking quietly into the dog's ear. "You did good, buddy," he murmured. "More than good, you were extraordinary." Rex lifted his massive head slightly, looking directly at Moore, eyes calm and understanding. He exhaled slowly, a quiet affirmation of trust. It was almost as if he understood the weight of what had just happened, the gravity of his role, not just as a police dog, but as a savior, a guardian, and now a friend. Eli's parents finally stood, holding their son's small hands between theirs. "We owe so much to you," Sarah whispered softly, looking down at Rex. Her voice trembled, but it was full of gratitude. "You saved him once, and now you've reminded him of that protection. You've given him courage he never lost, even when he didn't know it." Eli squeezed Rex's shoulder gently. "I remember now," he said softly, "and I know you'll always be here." Rex pressed his head against Eli one last time, and then he sat obediently beside the boy, tail sweeping the grass in a slow, controlled motion. Moore reached down to adjust the leash, but Rex didn't resist. He didn't move without Eli's guidance. Every action was deliberate, every response measured. The bond between them was no longer just recognition. It was mutual respect, trust, and a quiet understanding that would endure long past this moment. The spectators began to murmur again, softly this time, almost reverently. Some of them raised their phones for pictures, not to show off, but to preserve a memory of something truly extraordinary. Others simply remained still, unwilling to break the spell of what had transpired. One of the officers approached more quietly. "Do you think he always remembers people like that?" he asked, nodding toward Eli. Moore shook his head slowly. "No, very rarely. Rex is exceptional. He remembers moments that matter, life-and-death moments. And that child, he mattered." From the crowd, a mother whispered to her son, "Remember this day. Remember how trust and courage look. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes, they have fur and 4 legs." The sun continued to sink, painting the park in warm hues. Eli's small voice broke the silence. "I'm glad we found each other again." Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle. It was a quiet confirmation, a message without words. "Yes, and we always will." Moore watched them, his heart full. He had trained dogs to detect, track, and protect, but he had rarely witnessed the kind of profound connection he was seeing now. This was beyond obedience, beyond instinct. This was loyalty, memory, and love in its purest, simplest form. Eli's parents knelt beside him, wrapping him in an embrace that included Rex. For the first time in months, the boy's family felt complete. Every fear, every tear shed during his disappearance, every anxious night of wondering, now it felt resolved. The bond they witnessed was a promise that courage, protection, and memory endure. The officers quietly returned to their vehicles, leaving the child and his dog to savor their reunion. Moore stayed a moment longer, observing. He knew the story would be told again and again, not just about the missing child or the police dog, but about something deeper. A reminder that the world is full of bonds unseen, of trust earned, and of guardians who watch over lives silently. As Eli finally ran a small circle around Rex, laughing softly, the dog trotted alongside him, careful to keep his pace gentle and protective. The crowd couldn't help but smile. What had begun as a tense, uncertain demonstration had ended in a tableau of joy, safety, and trust that transcended words. One young boy in the crowd whispered to his mother, "I want a dog like that someday." His mother smiled softly, tears in her eyes. "You will," she said, "but remember, this isn't just a dog. This is love, trust, and courage. That's what makes it special." As the sun finally slipped behind the horizon, Eli knelt beside Rex one last time, resting his forehead against the dog's massive head. "I won't forget," he whispered, "ever." Rex exhaled slowly, a low, contented sound, pressing his head against Eli one last time. The gesture was a promise. Protection, loyalty, and memory would endure. Officer Moore stood quietly, a lump in his throat. He knew the story didn't end here. The bond between Eli and Rex would continue to grow, silently teaching everyone around them about courage, loyalty, and the quiet heroism of those who act without words. The spectators slowly began to leave, but their whispers carried through the park. They spoke of trust, bravery, and the rare moments when life reveals something extraordinary. Children skipped home with wide eyes, parents reflected on the lesson of connection, and even the officers remained thoughtful, knowing they had just witnessed a story that would stay with them forever. Sarah and her husband finally gathered Eli into their arms, both of them hugging him tightly while Rex sat calmly beside them, tail still, breathing steady. The warmth of family, the safety of memory, and the quiet power of a dog's loyalty combined into a single moment, one that transcended fear, distance, and time. Eli whispered softly to Rex, "Thank you for everything." Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle as if to say, "It's what I was born to do, and I will always be here for you." And in that golden sunset, under the shadow of maple trees and the watchful eyes of a community forever changed, a boy and his dog walked home together, reunited, unshakable, and bonded in a way that would endure for the rest of their lives. A single lesson echoed quietly through the park. Some bonds cannot be broken, some memories cannot fade, and some heroes, whether human or canine, carry courage in their hearts forever.